All right, so we're going to finish up the story of the Middle East in the 20th century today. And, so much of this story is kind of continuing, it's ongoing, it's unresolved. And so some of these trends I'll try and fill in and let you know what's happening today. Although you kind of just you need to be more familiar with kind of, the last, uh, you know, 15, 20 years leading up to the present day concerns. So the era we'll be looking at today is really 1990 to 2005, and it's during this era, all right, that we get a new generation of leaders. King Hussein in Jordan will die. His son Abdullah II will come to power. Jordan has had a monarchy for quite some time. They're pro-Western for the most part, and even King Hussein was married to an American at one point in time. So, when Abdullah II comes to power, they're going to be trying to continue this same pro-Western stance, and they're going to be one of the formidable powers on the more conservative side of the Arab Cold War. We're also going to see Yasser Arafat die in 2004, leading a power vacuum that Mahmoud Abbas will fill as the president of the Palestine National Authority. We'll also see Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak promising elections, although during the Arab Spring in 2011, he will be removed from power. The major things these leaders are all promising are reforms in the form of economic reforms, technological education, and jobs. So really trying to lower unemployment, decrease inflation, open up the job market, become more of a world player in terms of the economy. And some will be somewhat effective, but most of these powers will be ineffective at making this happen. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein remains in power and is going to be kind of a thorn in the side of the United States. During the 1990s, create economic sanctions and direct air raids against Iraq. It actually causes the death inadvertently of 500,000 Iraqi children. And basically, Iraq will be a U.S. Threat to security in the Middle East during the 1990s. After 9/11 and the removal of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the U.S. will turn to getting rid of Saddam Hussein. We think that they are harboring terrorists and have weapons of mass destruction, not in the form of nuclear weapons, but in the form of chemical weapons. So, in 2003, the United States, Britain, and other small European states invade Iraq, despite the fact that there is a huge amount of international opposition. Remember, during Desert Storm, with the U.S.-led coalition force against Saddam Hussein, when they invade Kuwait, there's actually intense international cooperation. Not so with Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. The U.S. quickly defeats the Iraqi military. Iraq is occupied, and the United States arrests terrorists, and actually begins a lot of atrocities against these inmates that are just being suspected of being terrorists. We don't ever find weapons of mass destruction, though Hussein is captured and executed by a new Iraqi court of law. We get elections in 2005. The Shia majority emerges in Iraq as the victors. The Kurds do gain a lot of traction, though, in these elections, which we'll get to in a minute. The U.S. will continue to occupy Iraq. We leave 100,000 troops there in order to create at least a semblance of security and to control their petroleum reserves. And what's really ironic here is, Iraq, which we invade and try to transition, for the sake of democracy. We ignore, turn a blind eye to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, which are both monarchies, but have limited elections, especially with women. They don't allow women to vote in Saudi Arabia's case. So once again, the United States picks and chooses our battles here with whatever will promote our interests the most. Other areas, we're going to do a little kind of quick tour of the rest of the Middle East. Kurdish minorities. So Kurds, I'm going to show you where they are on the maps. Kurds are an ethnic group that is located kind of spread out between Iraq, Turkey, and other areas in the Middle East. And during this time period in the late 20th century, they're pushing for autonomy or maybe even their own independent state. of which to basically self-govern. And like I said, here they are. All the pink is Kurdish, so majority Turkey, Iraq, Iran, right? And there's this kind of idea of gaining an independent state in these areas to allow Kurdish self-determination. They do it, through elected assemblies in the 2005 Iraqi elections. But the Turkish government, the one where the most Kurds are, ignores the demands for the Kurdish self-determination in their areas and actually direct attacks against Kurdish insurgents, which is hard to say 3 times fast. Kurdish insurgents, very, very tough. Anyway, Kurds actually are going to help later in the fight against ISIS. So today, in the present day 2018, we're starting to see that Kurds are having more and more of an international weight of getting their own state. Cyprus continues to be divided between Turkish and Greek areas. The Turkish Cypriots vote for reunification in 2004. The Greeks reject it, although they have joined the European Union. So that area still remains in conflict. Lebanon, okay, they have a civil war, as we mentioned before, through the 80s, and have continued to have conflict there. Religious affiliation as a basis of national identity, that's been a continued emphasis and has led to division. The Hezbollah party has gained traction and in the 1990s launched raids against occupied Israel in the southern part of Lebanon, which is actually going to lead to Israel withdrawing from this area and kind of the growth of Hezbollah, because they credit themselves as the ones that caused this withdrawal. Algeria is going to plummet into a civil war, though, during this time period. They try and basically halt elections in the early 90s where militant Islamic groups were expected to win, right? So democracy was dictating that actually more radical parties were going to win. 50,000 people die in the civil war, and we see Islamic parties banned. In Turkey, also Islamic political parties will gain power with the poor in urban and rural areas. They'll try to improve their record on human rights. They're still running away from the Armenian genocide, and they try to mediate the dispute over the island of Cyprus. In Iran, reformist politicians gain a little bit of power here. The young in Iran are looking to basically see some liberalization from the Khomeini's conservative policies, and they do get a president elected in 1997, although conservatives and the clergy, which are known as the mullahs, jail writers, shut down liberal newspapers and criticize the West. The Western community has therefore tried to limit Iran from becoming a nuclear power. Finally, in the Sudan, civil war erupted between the North and the South. The military regime instituted Islamic law. In the Darfur province, which is where the worst fighting was located, we see mass atrocities, genocide, and basically these atrocities are committed between rival tribes. I'll get a little thing of Darfur here. There you can see the maps. Darfur province. There it is, in Western Sudan, which is going to be divided between the two. This fight was not necessarily about religion for the most part, but it was about tribal differences. International community condemns the genocide here, but we do not get involved in the fighting. And since then, the Sudan has been split into 2 areas, and now we have 2 countries today where there used to be 1. All right, last thing we'll finish today is the ending of the Arab-Israeli conflict in the 20th century. We've watched videos where we've seen Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shaking hands in 1993 with President Clinton presiding. That was known as the Oslo Agreement. Okay, this saw Israelis withdraw and turning over limited portions of the West Bank and Gaza Strip to the Palestinian National Authority, led by Yasser Arafat. Clinton was the one that helped mediate this agreement. Okay, Jordan will sign a peace treaty with Israel in 1994, but the Oslo Agreement doesn't really work that well. Once again, it's avoiding the issues that have been avoided forever. Over the status of Jerusalem. Where would it be? Would it be the capital? How would it be split between Palestine and Israel. Also, there was a split over the right of Palestinian refugees to return, right? Or if Palestinians would get their own state. So the major hotbed issues between Palestinians and Israelis is never resolved. They're looking to get full independence, but Israel opposes. In the late 90s, the PLO can't solve their economic problems, cannot stop violent attacks against Israelis, so there's a radicalization of Palestinian presence in this area. They're seeing higher unemployment. They're seeing more land lost to Israelis and settlements, which of course was part of the videos you watched as well. Now, radicals will gain more traction here. We see Israelis massacring Muslims in the Hebron Mosque. Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated by another Israeli over a peace process, and Hamas, a terrorist organization led by Palestinians, will end up killing Israeli civilians as well. So more and more fighting has been the name of the game here, and really since 1993, the region has become more and more divided, not more and more unified. Also during this time period in the late 90s, the Likud party will gain control in Israel. They deadlock with Palestinians in 2000 over the status of Jerusalem and the rights of refugees to return. Ariel Sharon is elected prime minister of Israel, okay, which leads then to Palestinian suicide bombers attacking Israeli civilians. Israel will then respond with reoccupying a lot of the territory from which it had left in the Gaza Strip and West Bank. And, you know, the spiral of violence and devastation continued and has led to a situation where 47% of Palestinians live below the poverty line, which is set at $410 per month for a family of 6. Now, that's a pretty generous poverty line, especially in Western standards, but that's what it is. And the vast majority of Palestinians live below that. Sharon builds a 360-kilometer wall on Palestinian land to keep the two groups separate. But he does call for the end of the occupation of Gaza Strip and removes troops from that area. As a result, Israeli radicals threaten to assassinate him. So, you know, massive problems still, end in sight for this conflict, and leaders of both sides seem to be content with the status quo because there's just no agreement over what to do. In the meantime, Israel continues to gain more and more land, as we see here in this map. This red is the Palestinian-held areas, and this is disappearing very, very quickly, and Israeli-held areas are increasing. Now, the good news for Palestine is most of the world has recognized them as a state. I mean, everything in green has recognized. So, you know, all of Asia has recognized Palestine as a state. Almost all of South America, all of Africa, Eastern Europe, right? The only areas that really haven't, even the Caribbean actually, the only areas that haven't are North America, right? Led by the United States and Canada and Mexico. Almost all of Western Europe, all right, besides Sweden and Australia, right? But the majority of the world thinks Palestine should have its own state, and it's even been granted non-member status in the UN. So there is some hope that maybe, just maybe, they will get their own country, but it's probably going to be a very protracted and violent process at the end of the day. Good luck with your questions, and let me know if you need anything. Thanks so much.